So I'm just gonna kind of give you a brief overview today of Unity. Kind of take you in, kind of show you what kind of 3510 I think it was that we did, kind of and that kind of stuff. So first thing is, if you kind of just want to install Unity right away, just go to unity.com/download, and then you can download the Unity Hub, which is like your kind of core place to kind of go around um, and like navigate projects and that type of stuff. Um, so if you just click on the download, then you can kind of go from step by step. And there's kind of two kind of places that I found to be very useful is the Unity's Asset Store. So all of these are compatible with Unity. They kind of have a connection already. Sometimes you could just go to filter by free. Say you want, one thing that we did was a skeleton game. So we just looked up skeletons and then look at the prices, and you can just double click free, and then you can look at all of the free stuff that you can use. So say you want to make beach, kind of look at kind of some beach stuff, some beach materials, that type of stuff. So this is just kind of a good way to get assets, materials, and all this other stuff, tools, VFX. The next place is actually Fab, which works with Unreal Engine. This is where if you're doing Unreal, a lot of your stuff you're shopping for is here. But one thing kind of useful about it is if we look over here, it is actually that right here, included formats. You can do Unreal, you could do or Unity. And if we actually look at it, this is a limited time free, and every 2 weeks it switches on a Tuesday. So you could just go here and you can click download, and then you can import it into Unity. So if you kind of want to store assets like I am, so if we go to my library, I have gotten all of these assets for free just because I have been kind of hoarding them over the years. So like there's this fantasy which can only be used for Unreal, but if we want to use Unity, which I know that 3510 really prioritizes, you go to formats, you could go to Unity, and these are all the resources I could have used for my Unity project. We were going to use this one, it was just too big for what we were trying to do. But yeah, so those are like the two kind of places where I've found the most to get assets and that type of stuff before you kind of really get into the meats of it. So if we now, once you download Unity Hub, you'll be taking this little thing. What you need to do is you need to go to install, and you would need to find releases. The three most common releases are like the 2021 versions, the 2020 version is popular, and there's this new 6000 version. All of them work well. All of them have their pros and cons. It just kind of depends on what you want. Um, but what you do is you just install editor, and then they would take you through the steps there. Once you have this, an actual kind of version, you can go to projects, and then you could create any project you want. So if you create a new project, you could select your version, and there's there's a lot of settings and stuff that first of all, there is a Unity version control. It can cost So just be careful on using that. The second thing is you could choose your local location and then your project name. But Universal 3D versus there is two. You can make it 2D. You can make 3D. There is VR and AR stuff. FPS micro game. Multiplayer kind of prefabs. A lot of these are like prefabs for like game scenarios. But what I did was I downloaded the built-in render pipeline because that's kind of the standard pipeline optimized for 3D applications rather than the universal where you need to kind of create your own universal render pipeline. But if we just create this, you can kind of go through and I can kind of just show you the ropes. It does take a while to create, so I will actually. There's that, so there's many I will be showing you the final project of my game that me and my group worked with. Um, so like one thing we decided to do was we wanted a low poly dungeon. And it is that one I think that we decided to use. So like there's a lot of assets that you can kind of use and work around while this is still going. And another thing I would actually highly recommend is if you do decide to use GitHub, there's a couple issues with GitHub. Um, since all the assets are stored in like hash files and like encrypted files and that stuff, it can kind of get hard. So first thing you'd want to do though is do GitHub README Unity, and you would want this this readme.md. Oh, sorry, not readme. GitHub.getignore Unity. And then you get this unity.getignore file that you'd want. Otherwise, it would kind of be a lot to do anything with it. Okay, so now let's kind of explain some tabs. First of all, you have your inspector, which you can see over here. It shows what your main thing you're looking at. So in this case, we are looking at the camera. Every game object has a transform, and then there's the list of components underneath. And then there's this built-in light one that kind of shows where the light is. There is your animator, where if you have a game that uses animations, you can, this is where you would kind of show the animation path, which I could kind of show you briefly. This is what your game looks like with the instance of the camera. So if we do this and we move the camera, more like rotate, you see that it rotates, so you can kind of get a good view of what the what your game looks like in this tab, even without starting it. And your scene is your entire scene. So say I want, one thing you should note is in here, you really want to stay organized. So what I usually do is create, not a mono behavior, create folders. So you would want to, you could create folders for scripts. You could create folders for imported assets. Materials, there's so many, but I would always keep organized and with this. Second thing is console. If you look over here, you can actually see console stuff. And then you also have your hierarchy, which is like your scene.js file that we have. Obviously in here you can't do for loops, if statements, and that stuff, so that's why we keep this empty in our our scene.js file or our local scenes. But say you wanted to add a game object, you could go there. You could create an empty game object, which just has a transform. There are some cubes, spheres, that stuff. There are effects like particle systems, trails and lines. There's lights, audio, video, UI, UI toolkit. So let's first just show 3D cube. So there is everything is in world transform. So in this, we are in the world. So the up here represents the world. So say, and you see that we have a cube with a mesh filter, a mesh render, and then a box collider. This is kind of one good way to start. So just like um, just like in our game where we have colliders, and then in order for collisions to happen, you also need a rigid body. Um, with the rigid body, you can, and collider, you can do collisions. But one thing to also note is that there is a character controller as well that you can use that deals with slopes and that type of stuff, but you can't use this is trigger effect for colliders for your character controller, so just be aware. And this is going to just be kind of an information dump for you guys, just to kind of get um, the overall feel. But there's a lot of other cap components that you can do regarding physics. So if you go to physics, you can do, where is it? But you could do constant force, you could do a cloth, make it a cloth-like substance. Um, effects is a big one. Particle systems is a big one. Since we just did particle systems, let's do add a particle system. We can do this actually. Create effect particle system. And let's make this a child of the this. So if we actually look, you kind of see that blue line. If you put it right under this, it will actually make it a child. So now if we go 0, 0, 0, and then we move the cube, it will move with it. But now we have a particle system and we have so many variables. There are trails that that make you follow stuff. There are lights that make it like a light source. There are subemitters. Um, there's so much stuff that you can do. There's so many resources. I would highly recommend resources for particle systems because I haven't fully explored a lot of it. But if we just stop looping, what we can do is we could just play. It plays for this duration, and then it should stop. Yep. So if we wanted like a start delay, there's a start lifetime, start size. So if we want something really small, we could do like 0.5, this is 0.1. And then if you play, you see tinier particles. If you want gravity affected by it, you can kind of put a gravity at 1, and you kind of see like like it's like trying to sprout out. Well, start color. With most of these, you can adjust in this little arrow over here to make it a curve or to make it a different type of distribution. Same with color, you can kind of change a random color. You could do a color between two of them randomly. What else? Play on awake means that once the particle system spawns, it starts. Emission is how many particles. So if we want to do a lot of particles, we could go into there and we could just play. 100 particles. What a variable did I just? Uh, so yeah, now you have a lot of particles. If you want to burst rate over distance, so like farther it goes, the quicker more spawn type of thing. And then the one that is most useful is the shape. So if we go to shape, we can do pretty much any type of shape. So if we want to do a cone still, you could increase the angle. So if you want like 180 or 90 to kind of get and then play, see that it does that range. If you want a different arc, you could cut the arc in half, so it only does the half of one. You could adjust the local position of it. So there's a lot of ways to do this. There's so many variables. But yeah, so with this, you can make way more advanced particle systems and that type of stuff. Let us now do a prefab. So say we wanted to make a prefab for this. Say we wanted to do it and store it multiple times. We can make a prefab folder and we can go into here and we can drag and drop. And now if we double click it, now we're in a local space of this specific game object. So everything in here will be local. And what happens is we can adjust the prefab. So say we wanted the particle system to be, you see how it's kind of in the center. Let's make it 1 or 0.5 to make it on top. If we go back and we actually look at the particle system now, it's on top now. So any prefab that you have in there is, if it's adjusted in this prefab that you drag and drop in, it will change it everywhere. And then you could just continuously drop more. So now we have cube 2 over there. We can do another cube 3, cube 4. And if you play, you see the game and you see it run. What's the next thing? Talked about that. We talked about local. Let's talk about UI next. So one thing to go into is go to UI, and then you want to do, let's say you want to do a text mesh pro. And let's import text mesh pro. Okay, now we have a text mesh pro. You see, if you look at it, that's very big. So what I do is I switch to 2D and then double click on that. And now we have a text. And you see we are anchored at the center. So if we go into our game and we scale it, we're scaling it based off where our center is, and you see it kind of go all crazy. Well, one simple change we can do is let's scale it on our bottom right-hand corner now. And you see now it will always kind of appear on the screen based on the right-hand corner. So that is what we couldn't get to with anchors, but now we have this rectangle transform. We have different scale positions we can do. So say if we want it to be more closer to the side, we can adjust this to be like 100 and position Y to be like 50. Let's do 150 and then boom. That will always stay 150 in the X direction and 150 in the Y direction from this bottom left corner. No matter how your screen is. And then you can make it whatever you want. One thing to also find is that I found useful is that you can enable and disable game objects. So say let's say that this is a hit marker,
which we do have, and we do something very similar to our game. We want it to be at the center, and it's hard to see, so let's change the color to like a red. Well, what we can do is we can enable and disable it depending on when we want to show it. And so now you don't have to instantiate and delete it every single time. It is a one and done type of deal where you instantiate it once and then you enable and disable it when needed. Um, so what's next? Oh, and there's a lot of UI stuff. There is text, images, panels, slider, scroll bar, just a lot of stuff. Inputs that you can do, and then there's an event system that does a lot of that I haven't really messed with anything, so that's something you could look at. Um, what else? Oh, one thing that um now let's look at actual scripts or what we would call components. So mono behavior scripts are the things that um I have my caps on. That's fun. Um, let's say test. These, and then if we go over here, it'll create the test script. Actually, let's rename this to test script cube to make sure and if we go over to our cube, say we wanted to add it, it would be test script cube. And now that is attached, so whatever happens in here will affect the cube. Now here is kind of the three kind of things you need to know. You could create public int health equals 5. You could create public, you can create public and static and private variables. So now if we go into here and we go back and we go to our cube, you see that now we have a health that we can adjust. We could create that's the main stuff. There's headers, which I'll show you how to do on my actual script game that I wrote for this class. And there's kind of a couple things that we can do. There is awake, there is start, there is update, there is fixed update, and there is late update. Awake is called before the scene even starts. So say you want to get components. So awake is more of a constructor almost. That's kind of the best way to think of it, where you get components from the game object. You maybe do math / pre-compute logic that is required. So say I was doing a damage, so let's say example, and I was calculating a damage, and they were on level 5, round 8, I would compute a damage variable in the awake or the start. Kind of just depends on if it's accessing anything else. But if it was all local in here, I would do it in this awake. The start is the first thing called, or is one of the first things called after the scene is loaded. And just like everything else, it's only called once per game object. And yeah, it's very similar to how our start works in our engine. Now here's kind of where it gets a little bit interesting. For fixed update, it is called sorry, not fixed update, just regular update. It's called per frame. And this is a lot of the logic that you want to do. So like any logic that you want to do, you call it in here. This could be something like what attack to do, or if you have any inputs, for example, say I have an input where if I press um, uh, what would be E, I interact with something, or something of the sorts, then this is kind of where you would want your update to be. For fixed update, this is called per physics step. So every time your physics simulates something, will be called afterwards, I think. So with it being called afterwards, a lot of your physics stuff, your collisions, and anything that you kind of want to check is kind of in here. And then your final thing is late update, and this is like your last thing you can update in this current frame. And a lot of this stuff deals with camera and that stuff. So this deals with should be used when dealing with physics. And then this is kind of like the post update logic that fires the update to complete first. And this could be something like camera adjustments, UI, follow, logic, that type of stuff. Now let's go into collisions. So as you see inside of our collider itself, first we need to do a rigid body if we want to do collisions. You select is kinematic if the rigid body can move or this game object can move. But so yeah, sometimes you want to do that. It just saves a lot of computation stuff. But say we wanted to do, if I collide with a wall, the wall prevents me from moving. What we would do is we would just have a rigid body and a collider, and that's it. If both of them then have a rigid body and a collider, or at least one does, then it will simulate the physics of it. But say we want it so that when the sword slashes you, you don't want the sword to affect the movement of the player. It just needs to trigger something if collisions happen. This is where we call the is trigger. And with this, there are kind of methods of that we could have implemented. It was just an oversight on our kind of on part. But there is on collision enter. There is on collision exit. And there is on collision stay. These are the three core functions for collisions, not triggers. There's a whole separate one. But what happens is that this is called once. At the start of the collision that is happening. This is the last. This is kind of the end of the collision that occurs. So what happens with on collision exit is that if you're not colliding anymore, it basically calls this the very next frame to just say, hey, wrap up with whatever you want. And then on collision stay is everything in between the first collision and last collision. There's same stuff for triggers. There's a on trigger enter. There's a on trigger exit. And there is a on trigger stay. It is the exact same thing, but for triggers, which just again means that triggers don't actually result in physics interaction. I think this is a good point to kind of get you where you kind of have a good idea of starting everywhere. Or anything else before Canvas, UI, game, creating prefabs, public components. Yeah, I think this is a good stopping point for kind of the tutorial, and now I want to show you what you can make with this game. There's still 1 week left of development, so there's still a lot of issues that we're trying to resolve, but this is what you could make inside of a game. So first of all, let's go to our game UI. We have a lot of stuff that's enabled right now, but if we break it down, you can actually see like health bar is up on the top. You could see an end of game state, which is like that scoreboard. You can see the in-game stuff, which is more like your hitbox, your ammo around floor. So let's look at my assets just to kind of get you a good scope of. So I have imported materials, prefab. So we see we have the camera holder, some nav mesh agents. Yeah, and then we have the scenes. So whatever. So if we wanted to do a start scene, for example, let's just save that. If you look at our game now, you see that we kind of have that start scene. We have scripts, and as you see, we do have a lot of scripts. And then we have some sound stuff, and we have the TextMesh Pro stuff for text. I will just play the scene, and I will show you what it is. So we have our start scene. If we play and we pause, first you see that now the floor/layout is now generated. So obviously, if we go back to in here, the floor isn't generated. So this is procedural generation. And if we run it again and pause it, and we play, and then we pause it, you see it is now a whole different layout than previously before. Um, and it all kind of comes down to the same kind of logic where I just have scripts. I have a script that basically spawns everything. So all the rooms and stuff. So that's why there's only kind of let's go back to our scenes, our procedural generation. Like you could see your where is it at? Yeah. So that's kind of the thing. You see that if we go into our game, we have the camera that we have, and then we can even just see. Yeah. Now let's just play it. I'll show you. It may be a little loud, but there are. You have your shooting. You have a reload. You have, let's see if I can find a wall by, probably won't be able to, but you have this environment. And then let's do just 2 rooms, 1 wall by. And if you see that blue over there, the blue light kind of shows the wall by. You have skeletons. This is one of the bugs that we have, but after a while you can shoot them and you see the hitbox. And you can upgrade it by this pistol and then upgrade it if you want. Now, It's an upgraded, you keep track of money. So yeah, this is kind of what you can make. And everything I used is pretty much the same. One thing that I can actually show you though, that is our skeleton animator. So inside of our animator, each it is basically very similar to behavior tree. So Unity doesn't have a built-in behavior tree kind of system, but it is very similar to a behavior tree with our animation system. You have an entry point, and then you have a transition to whatever you always start with. And obviously, we do the spawning animation, and then what happens is it can then go to the run animation, it can slash, it could slay slashing, or it could actually go back to the run animation. And from any state, if you go to root death, you go, or if from any state, if this trigger happens, so if you become dead, it's actually a, and the way we do this is we actually create parameters inside of the animator, and then we access those parameters inside of the component. So if we let's look at our skeleton script. There's a lot of stuff like nav agents and navigation messages that you kind of learn in here. So like you saw how the skeleton was moving, that type of stuff. You learn that in this class. But if you look at here where we do anim.setBool, which anim is just your it is just your animator component, and then you could set stuff to is spawning, that type of stuff. So yeah. Um, but yeah, and then you could set speed on that type of stuff as well. Um, this is where imports get really handy. So if you wanted to import something, you go to Window, Package Manager, My Assets. And then once the list kind of imports, you can say, hey, I want to download the zombie monster animations. I could download it and then import it. Um, what else? I think that is a lot of it. Um, I will give you one tip slash trick to go. Um, one thing, as you can see with our HUD, it's a lot of stuff. So obviously use game object hierarchies to your best advantage to do it. But there's also another tip that I found. It is called on HUD controller. You can put every single HUD instance or UI inside of a game object or TMP text, and you can have public functions to interact with them. And then on awake, we use the singleton pattern, which um, basically makes it this instance public to everyone. So if we go into here now, and if, I think even no, but inside of player, for example, I think not character movement, player interaction, 100% should use this. You see that we can actually reference the HUD controller as a static instance because we used a public static HUD controller instance and then set that instance equal to this. Which means that I could enable interaction text from here without trying to do all the logic of getting it, which I found to be very useful. But yeah, I think with this you can kind of start building the pieces together. I can even show you a 2D possibly. No, all of my 2D stuff is from a different engine, which I could. 2D it is actually very similar. I could just create a new project. X0, my project one, 2D. Yeah, we can create a 2D project, and we can show you that it is actually very similar conceptually to 3D. You just have that one extra dimension, but everything else is the same. The only difference is that you use for physics, you use 2D colliders, and then on the call for collision, you do on collision enter 2D. Um, that's the pretty much the main difference. There's no Z. Oh, this would be a good time to do layers and game object tags actually. Um, so we'll do that. Everything's still going good on the recording. Yes. We still have a good time as well. We can even go into um, say for example you want 2D specific assets now. If we go into here, asset store, you could always look for 2D specific stuff, so you can separate between that, and then you can also click free. And then you have the list of assets. Same for here. No, since Unreal is 3D, it only supports 3D stuff, but yeah. But we can get rid of that now. It's taking a while. What else? I think that is it for this as well now. Oh, inside of the Unity Hub, I forgot to explain these. This Learn tab can be very useful. There's a lot of courses and tutorials that I think are free. Or you could do like this like rollerball beginner project if you wanted to kind of start. Sprites, whereas there's a couple 3D ones if you want to start with 3D. And then for community, there's just a lot of this is discussion regarding AI, store, some training stuff that you can do as well. But with this now, we can do. Where's that up? So compiling. Okay. Now it's time for 2D. This is the universal render pipeline that we avoided with 3D, but I didn't have time. But as you say, it looks very similar. There is kind of just now a global light 2D. If we go to 2D objects, we could do sprites, so like a circle, and we can do a circle collider 2D. And if you see, there's like a little kind of extra line that is there. And if you want to do it, you would do on collision enter 2D, that type of stuff. It's the same concept of dragging and dropping for prefabs. The transition between 2D and 3D is very similar. So, but let's talk about layers and that stuff and tags. So obviously we have tags and layers up here. If we go up here and say we wanted to add a tag, we can click and add a tag. And let's say I want to create a player tag. I could just go up here and save it. Or let's say player character. We have the player character tag. We go in there. There's already a built-in player, so that wasn't kind of good. I know a common tag that a lot of people do are ground or floor. So say I made a rectangle, or we do a square. We scale it in the X by, let's do 5, 9, 8. And we set the Y down here and say we wanted this to be like flourish, so we could do there, kind of more up. I could go here and then I could label it as ground. Say that then I want to make a sprite underneath it. Let's do like for y 0.2 on the y, and we make this green. For like dirt, you see that the parent can have a tag of one thing, and the child can have a tag of what another thing. So say this could be a tag of grass, if we want, or this. So there we go back, we go there, grass. But say for example, we chose grass and then we chose ground. Sometimes it procs you and asks you, hey, do you want to change everything? Which will, I think it does it for layers actually. So if we go into here and then we say like for layers, let's say we have a ground layer at layer 7. And we go into here now and we say that we want this to be a ground layer. Yeah, it says, do you want all the layers to ground for all the children game objects as well? If you say yes, then we see that the square has the ground layer as well. And then if we kind of adjust layers, we also see that not sorting layers, not rendering. We just now have the layer. So now if we go into here and we go to project settings, where is the now you can go into physics 2D and you can actually determine what wants to be hit by the other. So yeah, that's always useful for layers. So say I had a player layer, let's actually make that. Let's go there, go into there, add a layer, and make a player. You see that now that was added. So now we can actually, just like how we had it in ours, where we can enable and disable. Say I want only the player to collide with the ground. So you could say the player and so the player and ground. So we only want this one, so we could get rid of that. And then the player this. So we disable all collisions except with the ground, so the player could only collide with the ground now. With UI, it automatically detects like, hey, this is UI, do not collide with it type of deal. So that's always good. And there's some other settings. So like there's the physics 2D. So like you see that in physics 2D, there's a built-in gravity. So if you do minus 512, as we did, or minus 9.81, no matter what, that's like a universal gravity kind of variable. And there's a lot of other general physics settings. There's a lot of settings in here that just depend on a lot of what you're trying to do. But otherwise, that is pretty much it. Hope this tutorial helps. If you have any questions, comments, concerns over this, or you say, hey, do you think I should take CSCI 3510? You could always send me an email so I can kind of explain it. I thought it was a useful course, especially that I like gaming. I really liked I really liked my final project. I thought it was something I was proud of, that me and my group did. To the point where we may continue or I may continue working on it even after this game is over. Just because that's kind of it's a good kind of framework for a lot of more advanced topics like animations, um, navigation for enemies, that type of stuff. So I really liked it, and you you make it what it's worth for this course. So if you put in the effort, you'll learn a lot, and thrive really well. Yeah. So yeah. Um, oh, one more very important thing. You see how it scales with the screen? That's because you have to have a canvas scaler with a scale of screen size with a reference resolution. And I do expanded with 100. So that's very important if you want it to scale correctly. Okay, have a good one. Again, emails on the syllabus. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about your final project or whatnot, you can always email me, or if you have questions over kind of Unity advice or that stuff.